Today we're talking about Children Rekindled, one of the longest running fan comics for the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. And on hearing that it's a fan comic, I'm sure there's one thing going through your mind. If it's a fan comic, do I have to know about the story and lore of the 11 mainline games, 5 spin-offs, 3 novels, 11 anthology novels, 4 guidebooks, 8 other anthology novels, an interactive novel, 3 tabletop games, and a movie to understand what all is going on? The answer, thankfully, is no. Because, wait a minute, 3 tabletop games? Children Rekindled is a fan comic that does the one thing the games didn't. Focus on the story, background, and setting from the view of the 5 child victims the games keep referencing, but never actually expanded on. And we're talking about the games here. I know the novels in their own continuity universes did cover some of these things in varying degrees. In doing so, we get an interesting and engaging version of the story for the first 4 games, even if at times it goes against what is or was later revealed to be canon. We get to see, learn about, and understand why we should care about the ghosts of the children that are otherwise empty and faceless plot points in the games. And if you think that description is unfair, how much would the story of the games change if the villain, William Afton, killed 5 stray dogs that became vengeful ghosts? Or if the villain cussed out a flying saucer and the aliens used space radiation to bring the robots to murderous life and revenge? Or if the villain didn't even do anything and the animatronics are just going crazy because they were never updated from DOS to Windows 3.1. This is why Children Rekindled winds up being a good fan comic, even if you don't know anything about or don't even care about Five Nights at Freddy's as a whole. Sometimes I feel like there's issues with pacing or losing focus of some of the main characters, but the former can be improved over time, and the latter can probably be filled in with flashbacks eventually. But in general, I recommend it, and I think it's really good. And yes, I'm sure there's other fan creations doing something similar, but from my limited exposure to the scene, it appears Children Rekindled has a few things helping it stand out on its own. However, this isn't the first time the creators have tackled this, so they have a little bit of practice. Children Rekindled is actually a remake of the team's original version of the fan comic, known only as Children. For some info, here's what Children describes itself as. Children is one of the longest-running webcomics posted on the Five Nights at Freddy's subreddit, surpassing hundreds of pages and gathering a fanbase of its own as it went. The AU focuses on the story of the missing children, and the children of FNaF in general, trying its best to tell the tragic and forgotten tale of a dark and corrupt pizzeria chain, as told by the original games, and mix it with new plot elements found in later entries of the franchise. It is by no means perfect at what it does, but all the love and support it got made it keep going strong. Children is made with the pure passion of a group of fans who, like everyone else, just want to make their contribution to the fandom in their own way. These days, this comes off less as a synopsis or summary and more of a farewell message before the remake happened. From what I can tell from the synopsis on the FNaF Fan Comics wiki, as well as the unofficial dedicated wiki for children, there really wasn't much difference except for expanded scenes and the art style being, well, let's not beat around the bush. It was plain and rough, but serviceable for what it was doing, and it did improve up to the canceling of the original run. Some of the deaths in the original version were different and also overall more brutal than depicted later on in Rekindled, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Apparently they had an ARG on the comics Discord and elsewhere, teasing characters with ties to the 5th game's sister location, including another canon character, Elizabeth Afton. But the comics stopped before any of that came to fruition, and Rekindled has actually replaced some of those planned characters with different ones. So from here, let's go through the story and characters, and I'll discuss some of the strengths, flaws, and how it links into the actual games. From the outset, the art has improved again, and this is the same artist, Bond film, with most of the same team members. We're introduced to the focal five of the comic: Charlotte Charlie Turner, Francis Duncan, Michael Gould, I think, Bianca Alves, and Daniel Chesser. We get a few pages of them hanging out at Fazbear's Pizza in the arcade, where they were celebrating Michael's 12th birthday. Apparently, Daniel was so hard at work to beat Bianca's high score that they stayed almost to closing time, much to Francis's annoyance. We'll see more about their characters as the comic continues, but most of the information on their lives we get in flashbacks at the end of the chapters, and those flashbacks show that the five friends came together over the course of weeks or months, as well as windows into their full personalities. In the present, however, purple text and a rabbit costume are introduced, and we're shown how much more creepy and horrific the games could have been. It's one thing to be like the games and say, "And then the children died, time for the ghosts." However, focusing on not just how they're killed, but the lead up to it, is where the comic can make or break itself. In fact, the original comic started on page 1 with William Afton already leading the kids into the back, with all 5 of the kids eager to follow along, thinking he was escorting them to the birthday party. In Rekindled, he overhears how much Michael knows about and loves the Fazbear franchise, and offers to give the 5 kids a special guided tour, especially since it's his birthday. Francis, who in this version of the comic already didn't like the animatronics, actually feels concerned about the whole mess, but Charlie and Michael convince him that it'll be fun, and they're sure it's safe. I mean, after all, it's a family establishment. Aren't the employees expected to be nice to the kids like this? This is part of what makes either version of the comics lead up work. It's pretty much a very horrifyingly realistic depiction of how twisted bastards like William Afton would operate. And when the killings start, it's very clear he's twisted and psychotic. As I said, in the original, the killings were more brutal and bloody, with William describing what he was doing as something fun to him. At one point in the original, he takes a moment to ponder if it would be more interesting to snap a neck to the left or to the right. And that characterization of him exists in Rekindled as well, where he treats murder as a chance to find new, quote-unquote, fun ways to do it. The new version of the deaths, however, are still harsh, but given a more artistic or stylistic treatment in their presentation. The colors switch to black and white with splashes of red, or are just implied and described after the fact. When they reawaken as ghosts, their dying injuries are reflected and retained in their spirit forms. Daniel had both his eyes stabbed out, so even as a ghost he's now blind. Bianca was electrocuted by one of the robot's generators, so she has electric burns scarred into her neck and her hair is permanently standing on end. Francis tried to defend the rest of them and got his midsection gashed open for the trouble. Charlie... Oh, Jesus, Charlie. William dragged her into the kitchen and shoved her into a pizza oven to burn. In Rekindled, we're spared seeing what happens to her, but that doesn't stop our imagination from suggesting the terror she must have been going through. Not to mention the very understandable confusion and freakouts all the children are having during all of this. Michael is so scared out of his wits he tries to hide in a Freddy suit. William comes back and quickly realizes where he is, so he informs Michael of the folly of trying to hide in what turns out to be a spring-lock suit. Effectively, these are robots that if you turn a handle or something, the robot parts move off to the side so you can wear it as a costume as a human performer. But if the parts are activated while someone's still inside of it... yeah. Well, that was gruesome and gratuitous, so why did I go into all that? Because not only do all these injuries influence and explain the form that they take as ghosts, But how the comic is depicting these deaths is giving a form of respect to the horror and the nature of what's occurring to the children, compared to, say, the honestly flippant way that Mortal Kombat nowadays treats their death and gore as an entertaining spectacle. The Children Rekindled wants you to know that the comic itself understands how bad this stuff is. And when it does that, it's easier to care about what the kids went through and how they'll be handling it. It's also a lot easier to empathize and share the sorrow of the parents desperately begging for answers about their missing children, as well as loathe the company officials for covering it up, when we aren't thinking about how cool their deaths are. And I'm not talking down ghost stories for grown-ups kind of stuff, as I've heard them called once. There's entertainment in wanting to see Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger go nuts on another 2 hours worth of victims. But Children Rekindled doesn't want us to be entertained by this aspect of the horror. It's a horror story. And while there is levity and light moments between the characters and their interactions, it never forgets the situation they're all in. It's a short mention from Charlie during the early moments of adjusting to everything, but it's an important thing. They still feel the pain of their wounds. And much later in the comic, it's also mentioned their existence just feels wrong in ways they can't explain or understand. Also, I want to take time to mention that I'm actually not against children playing or knowing about Five Nights at Freddy's, at least the games. As far as I know, in the games, there's nothing explicitly gory or violent being shown, with the exception, possibly, of red pixels being in, like, these 1-bit Atari-style side games that some of them have. If the kids and you are fine with things like campfire stories, Goosebumps, or the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book series, then there really isn't anything in Five Nights at Freddy's that's beyond, or in some cases even comes close to what you can find in those. For instance, when I was in elementary school myself, there was a Scholastic book fair going on, and I bought a scary story anthology for kids, where the final story involved a school-age elf befriending a troll and then deciding to feed his classmates to the troll, graphically, before eating one himself so that he himself could become a troll. That's in a book explicitly for juvenile readers, I'll reiterate. A bit of a tangent, I know, but thinking back to my last video, I think I might have made it sound like Five Nights at Freddy's is something that's more explicit or extreme than it actually is. The games are, in general, more ooga booga than blood and guts. Shortly after their deaths and rebirths as ghosts, the five friends meet one other ghost, the 6-year-old Sammy White. He was William Afton's first victim back in 1976. Ah, crap. I should have mentioned. The present date in the comic is June 26, 1986. Also, Sammy and other first names are going to be familiar if you know the official novels or comic series based off those. I'll come back to this in more detail later, but at most, these are references, if not complete coincidences. However, the town being named Hurricane in Utah is something clearly from the books. I know they bring up Utah in the games, but don't know if the town was ever named. That and other things show how deep these fans looked to keep things connected with the hard canon while making their own unique tale. Back to Sammy, when he was killed, the knife was left in his... Am I scaring you, kitty? I'll pet you later. Back to Sammy. When he was killed, the knife was left behind in his body, so he gets to keep it with him in ghost form. Which mirrors how the presumed first killing happened in the games where William pretty much bolted after the stabbing and left the body in the alley, leaving his spirit to eventually possess the puppet. That's pretty much the only thing about what happened with the first victim that ties to canon, but if I'm wrong about that, feel free to expand on what I missed or passed over in the comments. Give yourself a chance to be part of this. Sammy first appears as the puppet animatronic before revealing who he actually is. Being dead for 10 years, he's quick and eager to help his new friends adjust to their new existence and tries to keep everyone in good spirits. As he promises, there is hope for them all, and that they'll be free, telling Michael something that will be very familiar to fans of the series. Sammy winds up being one of the more complicated characters in the story by the end of it, coming off as sociopathic or worse, but still giving the idea he wants to be the good guy in all of this and making friends. He's a 6-year-old with very little maturity and experience, and so far, a lot of his experience about right and wrong comes from the point of a blade stuck in him for eternity. It's at this point that if you've played the games or just even have some basic knowledge of the lore, you'll start realizing the connections being suggested here. Sammy teaches the other ghosts how to possess and control the various robots, reflecting how in the games the puppet used the animatronics to bring a form of life back to the ghosts of the children. Bianca possesses Bonnie, Charlie takes Chica, Francis is in Foxy, and Daniel handles Freddy. You'll notice this also reflects the order they activate in the first game, and another order is reflected in that same way. Of course, if Michael is the focal character, why isn't he possessing Freddy? Michael actually takes the place of Golden Freddy, but how he does it is dealt with later in the story. Unlike the games, which insinuate the spirits can't leave the animatronics, all the children are generally able to move about during the day. They just can't control the robots while the programming is running during the day, and even if they could, they find out why they shouldn't. Now, on the idea of why they can't, as ghosts, go off to like their parents' houses and write on a chalkboard or a piece of paper or whatever. The kind of house has a chalkboard in it. Anyway, why they don't go to their parents' house or something and, write on paper, talk through the TV like it's Poltergeist or something. The way I think it's being shown, outside of the general idea that ghosts are anchored to their location of death, which is kind of shown not to be true in this comic, I think it's on the first day they're waiting to see what Sammy's plan is, and then on the following days they're mostly hanging around with effectively the implication that not only are they trying to find the guy that killed them and not wanting to not be there when he shows up, but also they want to prevent something else from happening since they may have the power to do it. None of this is actually explicitly stated in the comic. I'm more reading between the lines on some of this. But to me, that's where it makes some sense. On top of that, there's also a time skip in the comic, so we may find out later that during that period of time it skipped over where we weren't seeing some of the children. We might have flashbacks or something that show that they were attempting this kind of thing, and at the moment we just didn't know about it. However, Chapter 3 is instrumental to setting up how the children approach the rest of their ghostly existence, as well as I feel gets us invested into their story, and by extension, the comic as a whole, much more. We open with Daniel's parents having to comfort his little sister and put on a brave face in front of her as the rest of the parents are calling each other while dread eats away at them. Meanwhile, Daniel is concerned about what his family and especially little sister are going to do without him, with Bianca trying to comfort him and Charlie. However, Charlie can't be touched without feeling immense pain, leaving Bianca wishing she could do something for her friends. She also mentions the living look more like shapes to her than people. Shortly afterward, while a photographer for the school newspaper and his buddy notice red stuff around the robots, Daniel's parents arrive to ask questions. As Bianca offers to tell him what's going on, he gives in to desperation and manages to slightly overpower the Freddy animatronic and try to reach out to them. However, he can't change what the robot says, and only manages to scare everyone away from the malfunctioning machine. Fortunately, doing this does let the photographer get a picture of their bodies hidden in the suits. Unfortunately, the two decide the police won't believe them and instead give the picture to the owners, leading them to not just hide what happened, but also dispose of the bodies completely so nobody can find them. Michael winds up witnessing this discussion, and everything that's been going on in this chapter winds up becoming important to what comes next. Also, the question you might have is why don't these kids go to somebody else and tell them what they found and what they took a picture of? I mean, there's other people besides the police and the owners, teachers or friends, whatever. Well, the funny thing is, I have no idea if this was actually intended when they were writing the comic or not, but a Polaroid picture like that doesn't actually leave a negative in the camera. It's a part of the photo itself. So when they gave that photo to the owners, that was all their evidence, and even if they did say anything, it was going to be a hard time proving it. Sammy gathers everyone together that night and reveals his plan. They know the guy that killed them wore a security uniform under the suit, so the only way they'll be free is to kill every security guard they can find until they stumble on the right person. This freaks out everyone, naturally, but in all the arguing and verbal flailing, Bianca shouts that she'll do it. This is something that, on my first reading, I felt was a little sudden. But taking everything from Chapter 3 into account, it does feel like it was set up decently. The scene with Daniel trying to reach out to his parents and the kids spending the day watching not just the employees being unhelpful, but also other people having a wonderful time with their families, might have been something Bianca reflected on. And let's very much remember, as ghosts they still feel the pain and effects of their wounds, as well as the general feeling of being in a strange existence. Not to mention, if she's starting to see the living as shapes, is she starting to lose sight of them as people? As she's walking down the hall to kill the guy, she has a lot of thoughts and second guesses on what she's doing. So maybe these are thoughts she also had before making her announcement. Obviously, for the setup of the games, all four will eventually take part in this, and as time goes on, they all make the same rationalization or excuse. What else can they do? In the end, especially with Sammy, these are all scared, lonely children with few, if any, people around them to give them guidance, making it very easy for them to make wrong decisions and possibly manipulated in such vulnerable states. Especially when Michael reacts to Bianca going through with it by effectively running away and hiding from his friends for over a year. This part of the story involves Sammy taking Michael to another Fazbear location, an older one in a neighboring town that Michael used to go to before his sleepy little town got the one it has now. This is where we start getting major divergences from the official lore of the games. We meet teenagers Chloe and Connor, two twins that were murdered by Afton sometime after Sammy. Back then, Sammy approached them as well with his plan to start killing security guards until they found the right one, but Chloe and Connor refused to go along with that plan. They're older teenagers, and their maturity comes through in not just that, but also when they talk to and empathize with Michael over what he's going through, especially when he brings up that he blames himself for what happened, and feels that he can't look at his friends anymore for being the cause of their deaths, which seems to be the largest reason he wanted to leave them. but fear what they were doing seems more like the final straw. Also, I think Chloe and Connor being killed when they snuck into the place after hours is another reference to one of the novel series, but I forget which one. Importantly, this is where one of the biggest changes between the two versions of the comic is, and it's where I'm going to have to mention the disconnect from the official lore. In the original version of the comic, during this section of the twins being introduced, they mention other victims being killed there as well, including Elizabeth Afton, who is canonically the ghost possessing the baby animatronic in the sister location game. In Rekindled, it is explicitly only Chloe and Connor that were killed. The official stance of the comic now is that they're ignoring everything after the fourth game for this story's canon. The time is taken to show Chloe and Connor giving strong and important advice and understanding to Michael. The same chapter also introduces us to another character, Kenny, a scared little boy that's mentioned to have actually witnessed Chloe and Connor getting murdered and obviously traumatized him, on top of being bullied by his brother back then. We find out later he's also taking medication for some terrible hallucinations, and Sammy decides to be the best friend Kenny's had in years upon hearing about this, by taking residence in his Freddy plush doll and talking to him. If that sounds familiar, then you've played Five Nights at Freddy's 4 and probably have an idea of what's about to come down the line. Meanwhile, Chloe and Connor teach Michael how to do things like teleport, shapeshift, and make people see things that aren't there, and a seemingly minor thing about changing posters. Now, putting all of this together gives us in my opinion, very clever explanation for how and why Golden Freddy works as he does in the games, including, in the first game, summoning him by looking at one of the hidden posters that can appear. And the similar effects in the games being linked to the fact that they're teaching each other how to do this stuff is also, I think, another clever connection. If we apply the characters that are behind Golden Freddy, Shadow Bonnie, and Shadow Freddy from the comic to the games, then the implication would be that if you're caught by them, instead of killing you like the other animatronics would do, the game closes because that's supposed to symbolize them scaring you away, because Michael, Chloe, and Connor don't want to kill you. After this, we jump forward about a year, following Kenny around for the most part and seeing the friends he has while he continues to deal with hallucinations and fear of his brother. Sammy, still in the Freddy plush, seems to be trying to help him, but deliberately or mistakenly, also appears to be ingratiating himself as the only person Kenny should trust. Kenny's friends actually do care about him, though, and want to be able to help him. And his Big Brothers group also has members in it genuinely concerned about him. Effectively, this all leads up over a few chapters into the big event from Five Nights at Freddy's 4. And yes, I know that game was supposed to take place in 1983, while this one is going with 1987, as well as the fact in the game's lore, everything else about Kenny's family and friends was later revealed to not be what the comic shows. To address the elephant in the room about the canonicity of this in a fan project, I know the lore, and I know what it's like to be on the outside looking in, so to speak. This is a much simpler timeline and setup the creators of the fan comic are going with. And the comic's creators obviously know the timeline isn't what the game shows, because they've had so much focus and care given to a lot of other things. I'm positive that this is something they chose to do to make the story easier to follow, and to help the narrative be as focused and interesting as it can be, without distracting people with the legitimately confusing game lore. Fan creations don't have to be faithful to the source to be good. Respectful, yes, and generally faithful to the spirit and style, maybe, or makes me feel like I understand the source material even if I don't know much about it, or the combination of all of that. I think it's a good job done on the fans' part. Overall, by being unshackled from the canonical sources of lore, it gives us time with Kenny and an exploration of his character that, quite honestly, is really making me feel bad for the little guy. Nearly all of the characters in this comic need a hug, but Kenny is definitely one of the most deserving. Which is why all this lead up to Kenny's fate, I feel, is an incredible expansion on what's revealed in the fourth game. It plays off pretty much the same way as in the game, including using similar, if not identical, lines. Brian, Kenny's older brother that was constantly scaring him with a foxy mask, decides he's going to make Kenny get over his fears by facing them. Or just bully him and use that as an excuse for it. Recruiting his buddies to help him, they drag and carry the kicking, screaming, and pleading little boy to the stage and force him closer and closer. With the teasing comment that he wants to share a kiss with Freddy, Brian pushes Kenny into the mouth of the robot, which then bites down. In the game, this all ended with the brother apologizing to what was left of the younger sibling. In the comic, we see the understandable aftermath. Their father is pulling no punches when tearing into Brian over what he just did, while Kenny's spirit is pleading with his plush doll that he's just plain tired and wants to rest. Revealing himself, Sammy offers his hand to Kenny, telling Kenny that it's okay to let go and that, once more, he'll put him together, and he can trust his friends. The sequence ends with Kenny flatlining, leaving his father, Brian, and his friends to unimaginable grief. We get one more flashback, showing that when Kenny was around Poppy and the rest of his friends, he was genuinely happy even when scared or upset. This was clear multiple other times, but since this is the last we see of them so far, I want to say that I really hope we see more of them. And not as ghosts or victims. With as much focus as we get on the living in this comic, I'm really liking all these other characters adding depth to nearly everything about the main characters in the setting. I don't know if they'll have anything else to do in the comic, and I would personally love to see some kind of positive or close enough to positive closure with them all in regards to their connection with the children. And that's something that I appreciate about this comic, which is when we have these bit players, so to speak, they can be just as interesting and engaging as the rest of the main characters in the story. The opening of this chapter also had Chloe and Connor confronting Michael more directly about why he's afraid to go back to his friends after a year, leading to him stumbling onto Kenny the day before his death and trying to not just comfort him, but also comfort himself in doing so. A few days later, Sammy, Michael, Chloe, Connor, and Kenny head back to Hurricane to rejoin the other four. They find the building was remodeled and is due to be reopened, and also that this night is the one Daniel made his first kill. Francis mentions that they all say a prayer for their victims as what seems to be a form of atonement and respect. And I just realized I forgot to bring up something earlier. Under Sammy's suggestion, after they kill someone, they stuff the body in an animatronic like what was done with their bodies. Now, this is what happens when you get killed by them in the first game as well, but in the comic, this is meant to frame it as the killer's MO, and force someone to take notice and hopefully investigate things, making this what seems to be a backup plan in case they don't get after themselves, as well as possibly make it feel like the innocent deaths aren't as pointless as they are. The argument they have with Michael over why they're doing it, and confronting him about why he left them alone for so long, is a strong moment for the writing and presentation of the comic. They still care for each other as friends, and each side is understanding of the other. Neither of them like what's going on. And Francis mentions he was afraid Michael would eventually start killing as well if he stayed. So it was probably for the best he left. Almost like, now that he's back, they're wanting Michael to help them stop. Before reuniting with Michael, however, Daniel and Francis come across Kenny after Daniel's first kill. And when Kenny sees the foxy animatronic, he goes ballistic and screams his ever-living hatred of Brian at Francis. This is pretty much the only time we see Kenny's ghost say pretty much anything. He's mostly silent, but in his other actions, you can still feel a sort of resentment about things. This all leads to Chloe and Connor introducing themselves to the rest of the group, and their presence is probably a very big factor in keeping everything civil enough, while letting everyone air their fears and grievances. The segment ends with Chloe and Connor sticking around with Michael to try and help keep his friends from becoming lost in their revenge or desperation. As they put it, to keep them from turning out like Sammy. Starting at chapter 10 in the comic, we begin having a complete disconnect from the canon of the games and stories. If we take everything that occurred before as a setup for these characters being involved in the storyline of Five Nights at Freddy's, and that wording may be important later, then what we're about to come up with here is how they can build off that base to give us something completely new, but still connected and interesting. Kenny mostly hangs around the CNC twins outside, ripping up grand reopening posters for Fazbear's that were put over the top of the missing posters for the children. Over a year, and the families are still hoping to find them. Back inside, Daniel is having a nightmare about Michael rejecting them all as murderers. He wakes up from it as Sammy floats by, controlling the puppet. Wondering what he's up to, Sammy reveals to Daniel what I skipped over in the first half of this chapter. It happened again. During the day, two 16-year-old friends named Ron and Jesse were hanging out at Freddy's. Ron wanting to play at the arcade while Jesse is worried about being spotted by schoolmates. Turns out, classmates John and his friend Paige were there as well, keeping an eye on John's little sister Lily. I'm not sure if it was a birthday thing or just wanting to be there. Either way, Paige notices Jesse and the three go to talk with them and have generally friendly introductions. Ron gets a pin from Lily, while Jesse is hesitant to talk to any of them. Apparently, Jesse also has a high school crush on Paige, which, at first, I took the nervousness and blushing as her having some kind of social anxiety, due to mentioning her and Ron were outcasts at the school. Which made me, rereading this part, make me notice that Ron is acting more like a wingman for Jesse. Later we get hints that Paige might be open to returning the attraction, so I have to wonder what kind of influence that will have on these characters and the story dynamic as a whole, as they try to come to terms with such feelings while handling their painful and wrong feelings when existing as ghosts. Anyway, after a few moments of getting to know each other, Lily realizes she forgot her ukulele on the table and they head back out to find it missing. As they split up to find it, we see a helpful employee has already found it and... oh dear. We don't see what happens after this, though the original run of the comic did. But in the following chapters, we find out Afton convinced them to wait until closing to search for it when there weren't many people around that would have gotten in the way, and then locked the exits and stalked them through the building while they all tried to run away and escape. I'm not sure the complete order of things, but we do know Jessie tried to fend off William with a pocket knife she had on her while telling Paige to run away. Part of her wounds is getting her mouth cut off, which is why she wears her collar up like that. Jessie was apparently killed after getting stabbed in the legs enough times to cripple her, meaning she apparently can't walk on her own as a ghost. John had his neck cut open, and Ron died trying to make sure Lily ran away. And as for Lily... damn it. I didn't think a comic like this would hit this hard. John's first thought as a ghost is begging to know if Lily got away. And it isn't until Sammy gathers everyone together that John starts to wander away from everyone, staring into the hallway. He finds Lily apologizing that putting the band-aids on the places it hurts wasn't stopping the pain, and that even though she was trying not to, she couldn't help but cry. In my opinion, this is one of the most powerful moments in the comic. There's people who win awards in Hollywood for doing things that aren't anywhere near as emotional as this. And there's no way that me doing this video can ever do justice to reading the comic yourself, and this part especially. It is a legitimate talent and skill to be able to write and present something where everybody that's looking at it knows the outcome, but then the outcome still hits you hard. In my opinion, this part succeeds at making us connect with the emotions and feelings that John, Lily, and the rest of them are going through in this part. This is followed by Michael walking in on all of it and calling out Sammy for trying to get more people involved with the plan to kill people, as well as another reason he and the others are angry at the little brat. Everyone realizes Sammy was active and spotted the killer about to do his thing, but didn't stop it. Sammy says he needed to get help and went to go find Daniel, but it's pointed out he was able to kill people as a puppet without them. And on my side, I'll add that even if he couldn't kill the killer, he could at least intervene and harass him somehow. A lot of accusations are thrown at Sammy, like he wants people to die so he can have friends, or he's too scared to actually kill anyone and is pushing others to do it for him. The sad thing is that for what we've seen from Sammy, especially with possessing Kenny's plush doll, there might be a kind of desire to have friends that is influencing his decisions in this regard. This inaction from Sammy is what makes him a character with a huge question mark for his motivations and personality. Is he a 6-year-old that's too scared, confused, and immature? Is he malicious and knows full well what he's convincing people to do? Is it a combination of any of that, or none of it? Wait a minute, talking about this part just made me realize something. I literally didn't realize this until I was recording this, and this is probably something that's going to freak me out the most about Sammy. We saw earlier in the comic that they were talking about other incidents that they covered up. Those incidents might not have been just the other Afton killings. Sammy mentions he's killed other people. Now in this case, Sammy probably just left the guards laying there dead, because it seems like his inspiration for stuffing them in the suits came from Afton doing that to Michael and his friends. And then I realized, if Sammy's here, Sammy was here when Afton attacked Michael and his friends. The realization I'm having with all of this is that Sammy was the puppet in this store at this time. When Michael and the others were attacked, was Sammy in a position where he couldn't help? Or could he help, but didn't? Is it Sammy's fault that Michael and the others are dead? During this time, the newcomers realize what Michael's friends were doing, and John calls them murderers and psychos, demanding they stay away from his little sister and the rest of them. Michael gets really angry at this and threatens to break him for it, but Lily intervenes and he teleports away to scream his anger and frustration. The next chapter has the police promising an investigation despite the owner's wishes, as through the entire chapter, cracks begin forming through the walls. I'm assuming Afton hid the new bodies in the walls or a sealed off room and built it back up and painted over it. This is a renovated location after all. However, it could also be symbolic of the metaphorical walls built up by the franchise starting to come apart. But now that they've had time to cool down, Lily becomes the mature one and demands John apologize to the others for getting mad at them. Notice that she's not demanding he accept what they've done, just that he apologizes over getting mad. After Francis seals the apology with a bloody spit handshake, we get the deepest look into everyone's motivations and feelings over why they chose to start killing. It winds up convincing the new victims to help hunt down and make their killer pay as well. But they seem to start making rules and plans on how to intelligently find the guy, so no more innocents are killed. During this time, Chloe and Connor decide to become more active in finding the guy as well, realizing that what they were doing originally, which was sitting around and hoping nature took its course, did nothing but help him kill 10 people after they were killed. Funnily enough, though, it's during this time we see how the sets of friends relax when they aren't being ghostly killers. Playing guessing games to pass the time, chatting, Paige and Jesse learning the controls for the toy animatronics. Yeah, I guess what that one's setting up for. Generally, this is where the comic leaves off for now, with the suggestion that the friends, old and new, will be working together going forward in a better way to try and kill the guy that deserves it. And quite frankly, after seeing how he acts in the aftermath of what he's done, yeah, I'm looking forward to this version of William Afton getting what's coming to him. With Chapter 12 finished, what's coming next in the comic appears to be linked to Five Nights at Freddy's 2, which is chronologically the first game in the series. Now, does that mean that because there's all these other games that are going to be taking place after the second game, that all of the efforts of the children are going to be for naught, there's going to be a bunch of mistakes, they're not going to complete their goals, blah blah blah? The funny thing is, I'm not sure. The fan comics already put so much other canon out the window or up in the air that it's entirely possible we might see everything end involving William Afton and getting their revenge on him with what's coming next in the timetable of the second game, so to speak. So, for Children Rekindled, all the other games might not happen. And that's really commendable for the fan comic, where we know it's using the ideas and the setting and other aspects of the games, and some things from the novels most likely, to set things up for making an interesting and engaging story. But just because they're linked to those things doesn't mean they're going to necessarily follow the same steps. But by leaving the games canon to the wayside, the comic has something else going for it. The characters in the comic are now their own unique characters, and it becomes easier to use them in other things by the creators. A lot of holiday and just for fun art has been made with the characters, as well as an entire new story using them. A Christmas Carol featuring the children. This makes them feel less like the children from Five Nights at Freddy's, and more like children that are being featured in Five Nights at Freddy's. I believe there's only one chapter of the Christmas Carol comic that's out now, but it blends the personalities of the children perfectly with an almost faithful telling of the original story. And I mean actual original. They feel like they were dropped right into the old story and not a modern retelling. Though that's not to say modern tellings of the story can't be good too. Francis takes the place of Scrooge due to being one of the more grumpier and cynical characters in the comic. Sammy takes the place of Jacob Marley, further hinting at what his actual character is alongside other art. Poppy, returning as one of Kenny's best friends, gets more time to be around by taking the place of Fred, with Kenny tagging along with her. Now, it seems natural for Kenny to be this story's version of Tiny Tim, though Tim was part of the Cratchit clan and not Fred's family. Speaking of Bob Cratchit, Daniel takes his place, while Chloe and Connor are the charity solicitors. Artwork on the cover will show that Charlie will be the ghost of Christmas past, Bianca is the ghost of Christmas present, and Michael is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Don't know if their adherence to the original story means if ignorance and want will be a part of things, but there's still plenty of characters to use. I have no doubt in my mind that as they continue the Christmas Carol story, plenty of other characters are going to show up, and we're going to have a chance to see how their characterizations would be reflected, not just in the Christmas Carol story, but also I have no doubt that if and when we see other characters in the Christmas Carol comic, they're going to give us a deeper look at what their actual characterization is, how they're used and how they talk, things like that. It's here that I'll say that I really don't have a way to gauge the popularity of this comic, but it's definitely popular enough. Because not only have I seen people on Reddit and elsewhere making fan art, making memes out of it, I also found a fan dub of the comic. Or, considering how the presentation of it is in the video, maybe it's more of a read-along or somebody telling us a bedtime story.
This is pretty neat. I guess voice reveal, question mark? But welcome to like my second long form video, I guess. Don't mind if you hear any background noise, but that doesn't matter. Calling me impressed. Now, seeing that there's not much of anyone else around, why don't I give you and your friends an exclusive look at how things work around here? It's your birthday after all. Seriously? Like behind the scenes kind of deal? Since you're such a big fan and all. Oh, I have to scream for this next panel. I don't feel like screaming, so it's gonna sound like I'm really quietly screaming in the mic, I guess? I don't know. Oh my god, I cannot scream. Wait. Sweet dreams, little child. Oh god, no, Daniel. Anyways, carrying on. With all these complex mechanisms, the armor tries require a ton of power.
Now, whoever this FNaF flavored panini is pretty much doing a one-man show, but to me that's not an issue. This is obviously amateurish, but in my eyes it's something more important. It's genuine.
I'm not good at voice acting, but this is what I do to practice, so yippee! Alright.
They wanted to do this, all they had was their phone and their bedroom, and they went for it. And they're not just reading it blankly, they're not just reading into a microphone, they're trying to give some emotion, they're trying to give some presentation to it. They're trying to put effort into it. And you don't need a budget to put effort in it. If you're getting a pencil and a paper to write a story or draw a picture, it doesn't matter how expensive the pencil and the paper are. And let's remember, Game Theory was started off by the dude working on his laptop, recording in his closet. If all you've got is a phone and throwing your covers over you so you can read this stuff on your own time, in your own way, do it. Because that's what's going to actually set you apart from the others the most. When people feel that you're doing the effort, that you're being genuine, and that you're not wasting your time or theirs, they're going to put more support in what you do, even if they think it might not come out good at the time. Everybody starts off rough. Everybody's first try is generally bad. I'm not saying this is, I'm just saying there's always a starting point. You're always at the bottom, and then everywhere else is up. I honestly feel this was a good job. Rough, yes, but a good job nonetheless. However, returning to the topic of fan creations for the comic, commenter Broken Mirror, a regular on the channel I'm always glad to have around, is not only the one that suggested this video topic and drew her own fan art of Children Rekindled, but also made it known she has intentions of making her own fan gaming of the comic. Keep us informed on that. Won't mind seeing it. I might sound a little off track with all that, but think about what I'm describing. These aren't things about characters in a fan comic. These are things about characters that are able to be on their own. When Rekindled was started, there were enough canonical names out there for them to rewrite stuff and put those canonical names and people in canonical places, not just William Afton as the serial killer. Instead, they dropped the canonical characters they did have from the original run and stuck to their guns over their original characters. In doing so, the characters are able to be their own personalities instead of forced to be something the actual canon, be it from the games or myriad of books, suggested them to be. All 5 of the main children care about and trust each other, shown just as much in the flashbacks as the rest of the comic. Michael has his faults involving self-confidence, but the others are there to cheer him on, and he's shown repeatedly under different circumstances evolving into a sort of guiding or leadership role for the group. Francis can be a cynical grump or feel he's too big a kid for certain things, but at the same time will always be there for the others. Bianca is a bit of an impish troll, while Charlie seems to be a bubbly ray of sunshine. To the point that in a flashback, Charlie was introduced making cupcakes for Francis's birthday after she heard the announcement of it on the school PA system. Daniel is a kind older brother to his little sister, and that kindness extends to his friends that they repay toward him. However, Daniel also sometimes feels like he's the one taking being dead the hardest. He was also a bit chubby in the past, but has been able to work it down by being on the same basketball team as Francis and Michael. Sammy I have the hardest time pinning down because of his actions through the comic, but I would compare him to this guy, if you know the reference from Danganronpa V3. A bit of a sociopath, but at the same time feels it's how things have to be in order to make things reach a positive outcome. Although in this case it's possibly for entirely different reasons than the other character. And when the others come along in the story, they each have their own style and character to them that winds up being something that influences the story and other characters. Reflections of these characterizations can be seen just as much when they're used in other artwork, continuing to make them feel as if they were their own characters and people, and not just creations of an author. To me, that's what helps make this comic feel like something that stands out, and it appears to be one of the more popular fan comics of the series. From my very, very limited perspective on that at least. Chapters 11 and 12, judging from posts on the comic's Twitter, it took almost a year each to release, so there's probably going to be a bit of waiting on the next one. On my side, I expect the wait to be worth it, to the point that I'll say this. I sincerely hope Scott is still doing his fan initiative thing and takes notice of this comic. I want to see actual publications and merchandise for Children Rekindled, because I would legitimately be more interested to buy that stuff than the actual Five Nights at Freddy's stuff, especially since the last official figure I bought was literally falling apart. I like Five Nights at Freddy's, but I love this comic and what it gives us. It gives me a better appreciation of Five Nights at Freddy's as a whole, thinking about what other stories can be told and shared about the settings and the events in it. How do the families deal with everything? What do the police have to do for their investigations? And if it inspires us to think so much about it or what it's based on, or make our own fan creations of it, doesn't that make Children Rekindled art as well? Good luck to everyone working on Children Rekindled. I absolutely love it and look forward to more. Thank you again to Broken Mirror for suggesting it, and feel free to share your thoughts on the comic or anything else that you want to suggest people to look at or even have me do a video of and bring a spotlight to, as big or as small as the spotlight will be. Take care, everybody. Remember to support creators and official releases, even if you think they suck.